June 4th, 1942, 7:10 a.m. Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The sky is painfully bright. The ocean below looks calm, almost innocent. A deceptive sheet of blue hiding the fury of a war tilting toward disaster. And cutting through that morning glare, its engine groaning like an old ship's hull, flies one of the slowest, heaviest aircraft in the entire U.S. Navy arsenal, the Grumman TBF Avenger. Inside the cockpit, Ensign Albert Bert Ernest wipes a line of sweat from his eyebrow, even though the wind outside is freezing. He adjusts his headset. Static, nothing but hollow static. But he knows they're out there, somewhere above the clouds. Something is hunting. The Avenger shudders a deep, metallic vibration you can almost feel in your own spine. The plane isn't built for grace. It isn't built for speed. It feels like it's fighting the air itself just to stay level. And right now, somewhere beyond those clouds, the men who wanted to kill him are laughing. "Sir, they call us turtles." Ernest remembers the words from a deckhand last night. The boy had leaned in quietly, almost embarrassed to say it. Japanese radio chatter. They call the Avenger Ogiru, a big sea turtle, slow, heavy, easy to kill. It wasn't just nicknames. Japanese Zero pilots openly mocked the aircraft. They bragged that the TBF was so clumsy they could shoot it down with one hand and drink tea with the other. One ace even joked, "If you miss an Avenger, check your guns or your eyesight." But today, the laughter is getting closer. Ernest tightens his grip on the control stick. His breathing slows. His gunner in the back, Seaman Harry Ferrier, hasn't said a word in the last 5 minutes. Not fear, concentration. Both men know that once the Japanese spot them, their chances of surviving are nearly zero. Then it happens. A flash, high above. Sunlight catches polished metal wings, thin, sharp, predatory. Zeros. 1, 2, 4, 7. Dropping out of the clouds like silver arrows. They're diving fast, faster than the human mind can comfortably track, and they are perfectly positioned. High altitude advantage, superior climb, superior roll, superior turn rate. Against them, a lumbering torpedo bomber so heavy that pilots joked it needed permission from the ocean to take off. Ernest whispers into the mic. Here they come. The cage of steel. Inside the Avenger's cockpit, everything feels tighter, more claustrophobic. The vibration gets worse as the Avenger's engine strains, trying to gain just a little more altitude, a hopeless gesture. Ernest knows this aircraft can't outrun or outmaneuver anything. Not today. Not ever. You can almost feel that desperate tension in your own chest. The sense of being inside a steel coffin, suspended in open sky. Above him, the first Zero fires. Tracers slash downward thin orange lines that seem almost slow motion until they strike the Avenger's left wing with a shower of sparks. Ferrier yells from the rear turret, "Contact! 7 o'clock high!" The Avenger rocks violently as Ernest tries to keep level. He doesn't dare dive. He doesn't dare climb. He can only brace. Zeros circle like falcons, peeling off one by one, setting up a kill run. Mockery had turned into deadly confidence. A moment of cold realization. As Ernest watches the Zero formation prepare their next dive, the thought hits him harder than the bullets ripping across his wing. They weren't supposed to survive this mission. None of the Avengers were. The U.S. Navy had launched them knowing the odds, knowing the Japanese carriers were protected by some of the best fighter pilots in the world, knowing the Avengers were too slow to break through. He glances at the torpedo beneath his aircraft, a single Mark 13, heavy enough to pull the entire plane downward. And in that one moment, the mission becomes painfully clear. They weren't here to win. They were here to draw fire, to die buying time for someone else, someone faster, someone higher, someone the Japanese weren't expecting. Ernest swallows hard. Another burst of gunfire slices across the fuselage. But then it happens. Something the Japanese didn't expect. Something small, but enough to tilt fate. 1-0 overshoots, diving too sharply. Ferrier's turret roars, a single lucky burst. The Zero jerks, smoke trailing from its tail. The pilot tries to recover, but the engine flames out. Ernest watches it spiral downward. For the first time this morning, the sky doesn't feel entirely hopeless. But the Japanese aren't done. The leader of the Zero squadron banks hard and begins a new attack. Run faster, tighter, deadlier. Ernest grips the controls. The next 30 seconds will decide whether they live or vanish into the ocean below. 7:13 a.m., still over Midway. The ocean seems to grow larger beneath them. Or maybe it's just getting closer, pulled upward by gravity, by fear, by the inevitability of what's coming. The lead Zero dives, not gracefully, not playfully, not with the smug confidence of a pilot mocking a slow American plane. This time, the attack is surgical. The Japanese ace later identified as Petty Officer Saburo Shindo, a veteran of multiple Pacific engagements, draws a perfect intercept line. His nose dips, his wings angle, and the sunlight flashes across the red Hinomaru circle on his fuselage. He is coming in fast, faster than the Avenger's crew can mentally prepare for. Ernest clenches the control yoke. Farrier yells, "Brace! He's on us!" The first kill run. Shindo's Zero spits fire. Orange tracers tear toward the Avenger, not wide, not scattered, but in a precise, razor-thin stream aimed directly at the cockpit. Glass shatters, metal buckles. A smell of hot oil fills the tiny cabin. Ernest flinches as shards pepper his cheek. The Avenger lurches downward, nose dipping violently as if shoved by an invisible hand. For a moment, all he sees is blue, the ocean rushing up to swallow them. He wrenches the controls back. The aircraft groans, creaks, fights, but it responds. Barely. Another burst rips through the tail assembly. Farrier's voice breaks with static. "Sir, we've got structural damage. Rudder's sluggish." The sentence ends in a scream as the second Zero slides behind them, firing point blank. The sound of metal dying. It doesn't sound like Hollywood. No dramatic explosion. No clean punch of bullets. It sounds like a giant animal being torn open. Metal shrieking, ribs bending. The Avenger loses altitude again. Ernest feels his stomach rise into his throat. He has seconds to correct. Seconds before the surface tension of the Pacific ends everything. He pulls up hard. His forearms burn. The yoke vibrates violently as the heavy aircraft obeys, barely clearing the waves. Mist sprays across the windshield. The ocean was close enough to touch. The turning instinct, Ernest knows this is impossible. The Avenger wasn't meant to dogfight. It wasn't meant to survive a coordinated Japanese assault. But survival, in moments like these, isn't about design. It's about instinct. He throws the Avenger into a shallow left turn, not enough to stall, but enough to force the Zeros to widen their approach. Farrier seizes the opening. His turret swivels. He fires. The rounds don't hit, but they interrupt the second Zero's aim. The pilot pulls away, circling for another run. Ernest steadies his breath. This is what they wanted. Chaos, distance, anything to keep the Zeros from lining up a perfect kill shot. But he knows the truth. They can't hold this off forever. What the Japanese ace sees. High above, Shindo resets his altitude, analyzing the chaotic dance below. He's surprised. The Avenger should be burning by now, falling apart, breaking into pieces under the weight of his assault. Instead, it's still flying. Wounded, yes. Dying, maybe, but still resisting. He frowns, a rare emotion for an ace who had never lost to a torpedo bomber. He banks right, forming up with two wingmen. They'll strike together this time, not as mocking hunters, but as warriors removing a stubborn threat. Ernest sees the trio approaching a perfect V formation, gliding into place. Farrier mutters, barely audible, "Sir, as a coordinated kill run." Ernest doesn't answer. He can't. He's too busy calculating something the Zero pilots don't expect, something no Avenger pilot had ever dared this low to the water. The gamble. Ernest levels out, throttles forward, and lowers altitude deliberately. Farrier shouts, "What are you?" But then he realizes and goes silent. Ernest is flying so low that the Avenger's propeller mist is curling off the wave tops. If the Zeros want to hit them, they have to dive at an angle so sharp they risk overshooting or hitting the ocean. It's a madman's move, or a genius's, maybe both. The canyon of waves. The Avenger dives into the troughs of rolling Pacific swells. Water sprays the belly of the aircraft. The air becomes thick, turbulent, unpredictable. Ernest forces the plane to weave, not to dodge bullets, but to force the Zeros into steeper dives. From above, Shindo sees the maneuver. A ridiculous, suicidal, impossible maneuver. He snarls into his oxygen mask. The kill will be his. He pushes the throttle forward and begins the dive. And Ernest whispers one sentence under his breath. "Come on, commit." And the Zeros commit. Three of them, all diving, all accelerating, all falling directly into the trap. The first real crack in the Japanese confidence begins right here with a slow, clumsy bomber making an ace rethink physics. But the trap will only work if the Avenger survives the next 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That's all the sky gives them. Ernest lowers the Avenger even further until the aircraft is practically skimming the crests of the Pacific waves. Saltwater mist spatters the windshield, blurring the horizon into a trembling white haze. Behind him, 3 Zeros dive in a synchronized attack, a lethal spearhead of speed and precision. The Avenger cannot outrun them. It cannot outturn them. It cannot outclimb them. So Ernest doesn't try. He forces the world into a narrow, impossible corridor a canyon made of moving water and whipping wind that invites the Japanese pilots to follow him in. The first mistake. The lead Zero Shindo himself commits too early. He dives steeply, faster than intended, because the Avenger is lower than any torpedo bomber has a right to be. At that altitude, the ocean becomes a living obstacle, twisting perception. Depth changes, distance is warped. Ernest slants right, slicing across the trough of a low swell. The Zero overshoots by inches. Tracers skim just above the Avenger's tail. Farrier doesn't wait. His turret jerks upward, gun screaming. A burst, another. The rounds don't hit the Zero dead on, but they do what matters. They force Shindo to pull up abruptly. A small, involuntary correction, a tiny loss of control at 300 knots. The drop of death. That micro-correction becomes fatal. The Zero's right wingtip clips the rising edge of a wave, a barely visible splash of whitewater. At the speed, touching the ocean is like hitting a steel wall. The aircraft cartwheels, shatters, and vanishes in a violent burst of spray. Ernest sees the explosion in the rear mirror. Farrier whispers, "Sir, you got him to crash." Ernest doesn't respond. There's no time to feel victorious. Two more Zeros are still diving. The narrow escape. The second Zero commits to the dive harder than Shindo did, too hard. He's locked into the run, tunnel-visioned, intent on avenging his commander. He squeezes the trigger. Bullets rake the Avenger's fuselage, tearing through the left elevator, punching holes in the belly, slicing the radio antenna clean off. The Avenger jerks violently. It almost rolls. Almost loses lift. Ernest bites down, on instinct and survival alone, pulling the aircraft level with every ounce of strength left in him. Farrier fires wildly upward, not to kill, but to disrupt. One tracer grazes the Zero's cowling, just enough to break concentration. The Zero pulls up. Too late. Its belly scrapes a wave crest with a bone-shattering hiss, and the aircraft disintegrates into a spray of fair and salt. Only one Zero remains. The duel. The last Japanese pilot doesn't rush. He doesn't panic. He doesn't dive recklessly. He circles high, studying the Avenger like a hawk studying a wounded animal, patiently, methodically. This one is dangerous. Ernest sees him reposition. Farrier mutters, "Sir, he's setting up a high-side approach. A classic tactic. Attack from above and behind, outside the turret's elevation range. A perfect blind spot." Ernest knows it too, and he knows the Avenger won't survive a third engagement. He glances at the torpedo still slung beneath him, the massive Mark 13 that feels like dead weight. Then he realizes something. If they keep flying low, the torpedo is a handicap. But if they climb, if they rise back into the open sky, they might die in seconds. Unless they climb unexpectedly. Unless they climb when the Zero isn't ready. The last gambit. Ernest slams the throttle forward. The Avenger surges upward, engine screaming, wings rattling, the entire aircraft shaking like it's about to tear itself apart. Farrier shouts in disbelief, "We're climbing! Sir, he'll chew us apart!" "Not if he misjudges the angle," Ernest mutters. The Zero pilot sees the climb and smiles. This is what he's waiting for. He dives, accelerating, lining up the perfect kill. But Ernest isn't climbing to escape. He's climbing to bait. At the last second, just as the Zero commits to the dive, Ernest banks hard left. The Zero pilot expects a slow, heavy response. What he gets is a desperate, razor-sharp snap roll that pushes the Avenger past its limits. The Zero's firing line misses by a hair. He realizes the mistake too late. He's now below the Avenger's turret arc. Farrier's moment arrives. The shot. The turret locks. Farrier squeezes the triggers. A blazing chain of tracers pours into the diving Zero, sweeping across its engine, cockpit, and fuel line. The aircraft bursts into flame mid-dive. The Zero spirals into the ocean, trailing black smoke like a dying comet. For the first time since takeoff, the sky around the Avenger is silent. Ernest's breath shakes. Farrier exhales a sound that's half relief, half disbelief. They survived, but their mission isn't over. Not even close, because ahead of them, over the horizon, wait the Japanese carriers. And the Avenger still carries a torpedo meant for one of them. This battle isn't about surviving Zeros anymore. It's about striking at the heart of the Imperial Navy. 7:22 a.m. The sudden silence around the Avenger is almost unnerving, like the sky itself is holding its breath. Only the engine's uneven rumble breaks the stillness, a metallic heartbeat keeping them alive by sheer stubborn force. Ernest levels the aircraft, climbing just enough to regain stable flight. Farrier rotates his turret slowly, scanning every direction with trembling hands. "Sir, I don't see any more fighters." Ernest doesn't relax. He can't. Zeros don't operate alone. Where there are fighters, there are carriers. Where there are carriers, there is death, and their mission has only just begun. The hidden enemy. The Pacific stretches endlessly, a sunlit desert of blue. Nothing moves, nothing breaks the horizon, but Ernest knows the Japanese fleet is out there, somewhere to the northwest, somewhere behind a thin veil of distance and heat haze. The Avenger climbs another 100 feet. The aircraft feels crippled, wounded, yet enduring. Oil sprays from a hairline crack near the engine cowling. The tail is missing chunks of metal. Half the gauges are dead. Ferrier leans forward, voice low. Sir, can we still drop the torpedo? Ernest checks the panel. The release mechanism light is flickering, not steady. One moment green, one moment dark. It'll drop, Ernest says. He doesn't sound confident. But confidence isn't relevant anymore. Duty is. The approach. Minutes drag by, stretched thin by tension. Wind whistles through bullet holes, producing a haunting, flute-like hum. Ferrier keeps scanning. Sweat runs down his temple. Then sir, 10 o'clock. Smoke on the horizon. Ernest squints. A thin gray line. Then another. And then shapes faint. Ghost-like silhouettes resolving into ships. Not destroyers, not cruisers, carriers. 3 of them. Floating fortresses of steel, each bristling with anti-aircraft guns, each surrounded by protective screens of escorts. The heart of the Japanese strike force. Ernest exhales slowly. His chest feels tight. This is it. A slow bird in a killing field. As the Avenger edges closer, flak bursts begin blooming in the sky, black flowers exploding ahead of them. They were spotted. A lone Avenger approaching the Japanese fleet wasn't just unusual. It was absurd. Who would be stupid enough or desperate enough to send a torpedo bomber alone into the teeth of the enemy? Ernest feels the aircraft rock as the first flak shell detonates on their left. Ferrier shouts, "They're ranging us! 10 seconds until they lock in!" The second burst is closer. The third shakes the entire aircraft, rattling the ammo belts inside Ferrier's turret. More bursts appear, a scatter of black puffs clawing the sky. Ernest tightens his grip. The Avenger flies straight into them. The last run. This is the part no pilot wants. The torpedo run. It requires flying low, straight, steady. No weaving, no dodging, no evasive maneuvers. For 20 to 30 seconds. The most vulnerable seconds in aviation. The pilot must present his aircraft as the easiest possible target, because if he doesn't, the torpedo won't hit. High above the Japanese fleet, the flak gunners see the Avenger drop lower. They know what's coming. An officer waves his arm. Dozens of guns re-aim. Ernest's throat is dry. Ferrier, hold tight. The Avenger descends until it's flying barely above the wave tops again. Flak bursts now erupt dangerously close, some exploding so near the concussion rattles Ernest's teeth. The water below churns with shrapnel. The air feels thick with pressure. Ferrier yells over the intercom, "They're bracketing us! They figured the trajectory!" Ernest doesn't answer. He's locked in, focused, eyes fixed on a single target. A carrier cutting through the water, its deck buzzing with aircraft, its crew running in confusion, its anti-aircraft guns spitting fire and flame. "Kaga, hear you? Soryu?" He can't tell from here, but it doesn't matter. Any one of them is worth his life. The final second. The torpedo altitude is achieved. The distance is right. Ernest counts in his head. 4, 3, 2, 1. He hits the release. The Avenger jerks upward as the Mark 13 torpedo drops cleanly and slices into the waves. It runs straight, a perfect line toward the carrier's hull. Ferrier sees it too. "It's good!" he shouts. "Sir, it's actually good!" Ernest pulls back to climb, but a massive flak burst erupts directly above the aircraft. Shrapnel tears through the cockpit. One fragment slashes across the instrument panel. Another rips through the floor. Another shatters part of the rear turret. The Avenger spirals. Alarm bells scream. Warning lights blink in chaotic rhythm. Ferrier shouts something, his voice distorted by static and fear. Ernest feels the nose dropping. They're losing control. Fast. Below them, the Japanese fleet grows larger. Too large. Too close. Another hit will end them. Unless they can pull the aircraft out of this death spin. Unless they can climb one more time. But the Avenger is bleeding oil, fuel, altitude, everything. This might be the moment it gives up. Ernest grits his teeth. Come on. Come on. The nose inches upward. But is it enough? Dawn broke over the Solomon Islands with a pale, almost sickly light. Thin rays pushing through the moisture-heavy sky, as if unsure whether they belonged there. At 6:41, somewhere between Tulagi and Columbangra, a formation of 21 TBF Avengers lifted into the air, heavy with fuel, torpedoes, and a sense of unfinished business. Lieutenant Harold Swede Larson tightened his harness, feeling the vibration of the right cyclone engine through the cockpit floor. Below him, the jungle canopy looked like a rippling green sea. Above him, the real sea waited, vast, indifferent, and hiding a Japanese destroyer squadron racing south. But this time, the Avengers weren't alone. For the first time, the U.S. Navy had planned a coordinated, Multi-layered strike specifically built around the Avenger's strengths. Dive bombers circling high at 14,000 feet. F-4F Wildcats weaving a protective net at mid-altitude. And the torpedo bombers, slow, low, and lethal, moving in below the cloud deck. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fast, but it was a trap. From the cockpit of his Zero, Petty Officer Yasuo Takahashi scanned the sky. The Americans were everywhere and nowhere. Flickers of movement hidden behind glares of sunlight. Silhouettes dissolving into mist. He spotted something below. Big, slow, lumbering. A grin crept across his face. Avengers. He pushed the stick forward and dove. The first bullets hit the Avenger's wing with metallic thuds, like someone pounding on a steel door. Larson felt the plane yaw. He wrestled it back. Oil smudged across the canopy, turning the sky into a watery smear. But something strange happened. Takahashi expected the bomber to break formation, to panic, to flee. Instead, the Avengers stayed in line. Perfect space, perfect timing, heading straight for his destroyers, as if they wanted him to chase. At 400 feet, the Avengers vanished into a layer of sea haze. Takahashi followed. Suddenly, the mist exploded with movement. Wildcats screaming downward, guns blazing. Dauntless dive bombers curling behind him in perfect arcs. Tracer fire stitching the air like burning rope. He had flown into a kill box. His kill box. He tried to pull up, but a Wildcat slid into position behind him, firing short, brutal bursts. Smoke filled his cockpit. He could barely breathe. Below him, the slow Avengers opened their bomb bay doors. On the water, the Japanese destroyer Hamikaze turned violently to port, trying to avoid the incoming torpedo track. Its deck crew sprinted into position, voices drowned out by engine roars and warning bells. Too late! Larson released his torpedo and banked hard, almost skimming the waves with his wingtip. The torpedo hit. A deep, dull, stomach-shaking whoomp rolled across the surface. A geyser of water and steel erupted from the destroyer's side. Men were thrown overboard like pebbles from a slingshot. Moments later, a second torpedo struck Kawakaze. The clumsy aircraft that Japanese pilots had laughed at had just crippled two frontline warships in under 60 seconds. And above the carnage, Zero pilots were dying in the very trap they believed no American could ever design. But the most shocking moment, the one that would completely shatter Japan's sense of aerial superiority, was still to come. The sky over the Solomons had turned into a chaotic ballet of fire, smoke, and steel. Explosions echoed across the water, sending plumes high into the morning air. The Avenger formation, slow and cumbersome as ever, pressed forward relentlessly, weaving a lethal corridor that the Japanese fleet hadn't even imagined existed. Lieutenant Larson's cockpit rattled with every near miss from AA fire. He could see fragments of metal tearing through clouds of spray. Yet somehow, the Avengers maintained formation. Steady, predictable, deadly. Above, the Zero pilots reeled in disbelief. Petty Officer Takahashi's grin had disappeared. The smug confidence of the previous weeks, when Avengers were called turtles, was replaced with a creeping dread. This wasn't a slow, easy target. It was a weapon, a trap, a nightmare. Sir! Radio crackled from the rear turret. Seaman Ferrier's voice tense. They're coming after us again! One of the remaining Zeros had pulled around, attempting a high-angle dive to intercept the Avengers from above. The target, however, wasn't just a single plane anymore. It was an organized offensive. Wildcats swooped down in protective arcs. Dive bombers threatened from above, and the Avengers continued their low, methodical, unstoppable advance. And the Zero pilot's attack was deflected. The formation spacing made it almost impossible to isolate a target. Each bomber acted as both weapon and shield for the other. Every attempted dive ended in failure, and every failure left the Japanese pilot's nerves fraying. Below, the water was boiling with destruction. Two destroyers crippled, a third narrowly evaded, and the fleet's anti-aircraft gunners were wildly overcompensating. Shots screamed past Avengers, hitting nothing but ocean. The Japanese pilots were no longer laughing. They were terrified, confused, angry. They had underestimated the slow turtles, and the cost of that arrogance was already mounting. For Larson and Ferrier, adrenaline and fear were inseparable. The roar of engines, the stench of oil, the metallic vibrations of the aircraft, every sense screamed danger. Yet within that chaos, a grim satisfaction took hold. They were alive. They were delivering devastation. They were rewriting the rules of aerial engagement in real time. Look at that, Ferrier muttered, pointing to a smoking destroyer. Larson barely nodded, eyes locked forward. The mission wasn't just survival anymore. It was vengeance, precision, and something the Japanese could not have predicted. Strategy born from what the enemy had mocked. Above, Takahashi banked sharply, assessing the destruction. He felt the sting of disbelief. Avengers, slow, cumbersome, mocked relentlessly, had inflicted real, tangible damage. Not one, not two, but multiple vessels crippled. He could hardly comprehend it. The tactical reversal was complete. For the Japanese pilots, the morning that had begun with mockery ended with horror. Their confidence, built over months of dominance in the skies, was shattered. The so-called turtles had transformed into predators, and worse, they had learned how to fight together in a way that rendered previous dogfighting instincts useless. Back in the Avenger, Larson adjusted his grip on the yoke. He could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on it. Every burst of flak, every missed shot, every torpedo released, it was part of something larger, a turning point. The once derided TBF Avenger had proven, against all odds, that even the slow and cumbersome could become instruments of awe and terror. Below, the Japanese fleet scrambled, desperately attempting to reorganize. But the damage had been done. Pride, arrogance, and mockery had collided with the harsh reality of ingenuity, coordination, and courage. For Larson and his crew, the sky opened briefly, a moment of clarity and chaos. They had become the hunters, and their prey had been unprepared for the lesson. The smoke of the burning destroyers curled into the morning sky, dark and menacing against the pale sun. The Avenger formation pressed on, low over the ocean, engines screaming, wings rattling from flak impacts. For Lieutenant Larson, the initial fear had evolved into something more focused. Pure, cold calculation. Every move, every adjustment in the cockpit was now about exploiting the Japanese underestimation. They had mocked these slow turtles for their weight, their lack of speed, their bulk. Now that arrogance was their weakness. High above, a group of Zero pilots regrouped. Their leader, Petty Officer Takahashi, barked orders trying to coordinate another intercept. But the Avenger tactics had thrown them off balance. Every time they attempted a dive, the Avengers maneuvered in ways that seemed illogical, yet perfectly designed to maximize chaos and minimize vulnerability. Larson glanced at Ferrier, who was sweating despite the cool wind. Ready for another run? Ferrier swallowed, his hands tightening on the turret controls. Do we have a choice? He muttered. The answer was silent but clear. They had a torpedo. They had a target. They had a mission. The first torpedo had struck, crippling the destroyers, but the Japanese carriers remained. Still, the momentum had shifted. The enemy now approached cautiously, suspicious of a threat they had once considered a joke. The Avenger crews pressed on. The formation split slightly, some climbing just enough to avoid flak bursts, others weaving dangerously low over the waves. The coordinated motion created an almost hypnotic pattern. Zeros, trying to predict movement, repeatedly overshot their targets. One by one, the Japanese pilots began to realize their mistake. They had underestimated the slow, bulky bombers. They had assumed arrogance could outmatch design. They were learning far too late that ingenuity and coordination could rewrite the rules of engagement. A single Avenger broke slightly from formation, aiming directly at a carrier cutting across the horizon. Larson's aircraft thundered forward, descending low, skimming the wave tops, evading flak, and positioning for the perfect torpedo release. Ferrier shouted over the roar of the engines, "Sir, this is insane!" Larson barely nodded. Insane, yes. Necessary, absolutely. The carrier grew larger through the canopy, its deck swarming with crew, anti-aircraft guns tracking the approaching bomber. It was almost cinematic, the kind of scene that would later be described in history books as improbable, miraculous, impossible. Takahashi watched from above, frozen for a moment. Every instinct screamed at him to strike, to dive, to attack. But the Avenger's movement was unpredictable, weaving, climbing, dropping in a rhythm that made precise targeting nearly impossible. He had mocked his aircraft. And now he realized, with a sinking pit in his stomach, the mockery had been a fatal error. Below, the torpedo ran straight through the water, perfectly aligned with the carrier's hull. The waves part like a river guiding fate. Moments later, the torpedo hits. A massive explosion rips through the carrier's side, sending fire and smoke into the sky. Deck crews are thrown into chaos. Anti-aircraft guns falter in confusion. The impossible has happened. For the Avenger crews, there is no time to celebrate. The carriers are still dangerous. More Zeros are circling. Flak is still exploding dangerously close. Yet something has shifted in the air, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. Fear has replaced arrogance. Respect, grudging and sharp, has replaced mockery. The Japanese pilots no longer laugh at the slow Avengers. They fear them. For the U.S. Navy, for the crew of each Avenger, for every pilot who had trained on the clunky torpedo bomber, this is the turning point. Not just in this battle, but in the psychological war above the Pacific. The slow, the underestimated, the ridiculed could triumph. Larson pulls up, wheeling damaged aircraft over the waves, watching the carrier burn below. Ferrier leans back, silent for the first time since the attack began. And above them, the Zeros retreat, regroup. Their confidence shattered, their tactics forever changed by a simple truth. Never underestimate what you've mocked.